I was sitting in a conference room, staring at three senior executives from what could be our biggest client yet. We were talking about a $2.8 million deal, a deal that could change my entire career, when my phone vibrated. I glanced down. It was from Isabella, and the first thing I saw was husband performance evaluation urgent. My stomach dropped. I swear I felt it hit my shoes. There was a 5-page document attached. A 5-page document. I couldn't open it, not then. Not when I was literally mid-pitch, my career hanging in the balance. So I silenced the phone, pushed it deeper into my pocket, and somehow, I kept talking. The presentation went great. We shook hands, they promised an answer by Friday, and I walked out feeling like I'd just conquered Everest. But then I got to my car, my hands still buzzing with adrenaline, and I saw that message again. I opened it, and everything just shifted. It was formatted like a corporate HR review. Categories, scores out of 10, detailed notes on my failures as a husband. Financial contribution? A 6 out of 10. Apparently, I was meeting baseline expectations but showing no growth initiative. Emotional availability? A 4, because I worked too much. Romance? A 3, because I'd forgotten our 3-month wedding anniversary. And at the bottom, in bold, stark red text, it read, "You have 7 days to prove you're worth staying married to. Don't disappoint me again." I just sat there, phone in hand, for what felt like 10 minutes. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just utterly confused. When had my marriage become a job I could get fired from? A job with a brutal, non-negotiable performance review? To understand how I got to that moment, sitting in my car with my whole life in pieces on a phone screen, I need to rewind a bit. My name's Ethan. I'm 32, a regional sales manager for a mid-sized tech company here in Denver. I make good money, around $140,000 a year, plus bonuses. And I own my house outright. I bought it as a foreclosure about 6 years ago and spent 2 years fixing it up myself, nail by nail, board by board. It was my sanctuary. I met Isabella at my cousin's wedding maybe 10 months ago. She was a bridesmaid, absolutely stunning, charming, quick-witted. We just clicked, instantly. She was 24 back then, working as a marketing coordinator for some startup. She seemed so ambitious, so independent. We dated for 5 months, got engaged, and then married 3 months after that. And honestly, for a while, everything felt fine. It was about 3 weeks after the wedding when things changed. She quit her job. She told me she wanted to focus on being a wife, on making our home perfect, on supporting my career so I could advance faster. And at the time, it sounded really sweet. Like she was truly invested in us, in our shared future. I said, okay, thinking maybe she was just burned out and needed a break. But then, the spending started. Before we got married, Isabella was pretty normal about money. She'd split checks, buy her own things, never expected me to cover absolutely everything. But after the wedding, it was like a switch had been flipped. Suddenly, it was $300 skincare products, a boutique gym membership for $200 a month, her hair getting done every 3 weeks at some fancy salon downtown. I'm not cheap, I've never been cheap, but every week, there was another charge on our joint account for something she needed. A few months in, I tried to bring it up gently, asking if we could maybe budget a little better. She looked at me like I'd just insulted her entire existence. She said, "I gave up my career for you. The least you can do is make sure I'm taken care of." It felt so manipulative, but I didn't have the energy to fight. So, I just let it go. I figured we'd work it out eventually. Fast forward to that message in my car, and I realized I'd been ignoring so many red flags because I desperately wanted to believe I'd made the right choice marrying her. I drove home in a daze, rehearsing different responses, wondering if I was overreacting, or if this was truly as insane as it felt. When I got home, Isabella was on the couch, watching some reality show. She looked up at me with this expectant smile, like she was waiting for me to apologize. I didn't say a word at first. I just walked past her into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, needing a moment. She followed me. "Did you get my message?" she asked, her voice calm, almost casual. "Yeah," I told her, my voice flat. "I got it." Right in the middle of the most important meeting of my career. She didn't even flinch. "Good," she said. "So, you understand? We need to have a serious conversation about our future." Like I was the underperforming employee. I looked at her. "Are you serious about this whole 7-day evaluation thing?" She nodded, completely serious. "Completely serious, Ethan. I've been unhappy for a while, and I need to see real change, or I don't think this is going to work." Her tone was so detached, like she was discussing returning a sweater that didn't fit. I stood there, really looking at her. And I saw someone I didn't recognize. Or maybe, this was her all along, and I'd just been too blind to see it. I took a deep breath. "If you're evaluating me," I said, "then I'm evaluating you, too. Consider this a mutual review period." Her face went blank for a second. She clearly hadn't expected me to push back. Then she let out this short, dismissive laugh. "Fine," she said, "evaluate away. I'm sure you'll realize pretty quickly that you're lucky to have me." She walked back to the couch, unpaused her show. I went upstairs to my office, closed the door, and sat at my desk. I wasn't sure what I was doing yet, but I knew, in that moment, something fundamental had just changed. I pulled up our joint bank account. Scrolling through the last few months of transactions, my blood ran cold. Thousands of dollars on things that had nothing to do with running a household. Clothes, fancy restaurants, subscriptions to services I'd never even heard of. And the kicker? Her contribution to any of it was exactly zero. She hadn't worked, hadn't brought in a single dollar, and she wasn't even managing the house. We still ordered takeout 4 times a week, and I was the one doing most of the cleaning. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in months, I felt something other than confusion. I felt clarity. If Isabella wanted to evaluate whether I was worth keeping, then I was damn well going to evaluate whether this marriage was worth keeping. And I had a feeling I already knew the answer. Day 2 of her evaluation is when I truly realized Isabella wasn't a partner. She was a liability. I woke up at 6, like always, showered, got dressed for work. When I came downstairs, she was still asleep in our bedroom, door closed. This wasn't unusual, she rarely got up before 10:30. But today, it hit different. Because I was actively paying attention. I made coffee, checked emails, and then, before leaving for the office, I did something I'd never done. I took my laptop with me instead of leaving it on my desk at home. I also called my brother, Ben, and asked him to swing by later to pick up some tools he'd borrowed. Really, I was giving him a spare key, asking him to keep an eye on things, just in case. Ben, being Ben, agreed without asking too many questions. On my lunch break, from my office, I logged into our joint account. I started building a spreadsheet, every single transaction since she quit her job, categorized. It took me almost 2 hours. By the end, I had a complete financial picture of our marriage. And it was worse than I thought. Isabella had spent $9,200 in just 4 months since she stopped working. Clothes, beauty treatments, meals with friends, subscription boxes, online shopping, boutique fitness classes, and a dozen other things that had zero to do with our actual household. Her contribution to our joint expenses, groceries, utilities, the mortgage, anything that actually kept our life running, was a flat zero. I sat there, staring at the numbers, feeling like an absolute idiot for not catching this sooner. But I'd been busy working, trying to build a future. And I'd trusted her to be reasonable. That trust, clearly, was completely misplaced. I created a new checking account, just in my name, and transferred most of my money into it. I left just enough in the joint account to cover the bills I knew were coming due that month. Then I called my buddy, Alex, who's a family lawyer, and asked if he had time for a drink after work. We met at a bar around 7. I laid out the whole situation, the performance review, the spending, the entitlement, every single infuriating detail. Alex listened, not interrupting, and when I was done, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said, very deliberately, that what I was describing sounded like financial manipulation. That someone who contributes nothing but demands everything, then threatens to leave if you don't meet their standards, is controlling you. He told me to document everything. Screenshots, saved messages, records of all spending. Because if this went where he thought it was going, I was going to need proof. Then he told me something I wasn't expecting. That Isabella had been talking about me to mutual friends for months. Complaining that I was cheap, that I didn't appreciate her, that she could have done better. Alex said he hadn't wanted to tell me before, thinking it was just normal marriage venting. But combined with everything else, it painted a pretty clear picture of someone who had been checked out of this relationship for a long, long time. I drove home feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Not because I was heartbroken, but because I was so angry at myself for missing all the signs. When I got there, Isabella was in the living room with her friend, Chloe. They were drinking wine, watching Netflix. They both looked up when I walked in. Chloe left pretty quickly, saying she had to get home, and I could tell from the look on her face that they'd been talking about me. Once she was gone, I sat down across from Isabella and asked her directly, "Have you been complaining about me to our friends?" She got defensive immediately. Said I was being paranoid, that she was allowed to talk to her friends about her feelings. That's fine, I told her, but maybe don't post about it on Instagram, where 3,000 people can see it. Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" she asked. I pulled up my phone and showed her the screenshots I'd taken earlier. She'd posted a story yesterday about being married to someone who doesn't understand that maintaining yourself costs money. And another one this morning about cheap men who expect their wives to look expensive on a Walmart budget. She tried to laugh it off, said she was just venting, didn't think I'd see it. I pointed out that it was public. That anyone, my coworkers, my family, could see it. That she was humiliating me online, all while living off my income. She went quiet, then said something that truly shocked me. "Maybe if you made more money, I wouldn't have to complain." I just stared at her. I make $140,000 a year. We have no debt except a tiny mortgage. And she spends money like we're pulling in $500,000. I told her, very calmly, that the joint account was going to be for household expenses only from now on. My paycheck would go into a separate account. If she needed money for personal things, she could get a job, like every other adult. She lost it. Started yelling about how I was trying to control her, how I'd promised to take care of her, how this wasn't what she signed up for. I stayed calm. I told her I hadn't signed up to be an ATM with a wedding ring. That marriage is supposed to be a partnership. And right then, I was the only one contributing anything. She stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door. I spent the rest of the night in my office, going through more bank statements, screenshotting more of her social media posts. Day 3, I worked from home. I watched what Isabella actually did all day. She woke up at 11, made herself breakfast, spent 2 hours on her phone, went to a yoga class, came home, showered, and then sat on the couch, scrolling through shopping apps until I finished work. She didn't clean anything, didn't cook, didn't do laundry, didn't even take out the trash. When I asked her what she did today, she just said she was busy, and seemed genuinely offended that I was questioning her. That evening, I got a text from Alex. He'd heard from another friend that Isabella had been telling people she was keeping her options open. Apparently, that's code for she's already thinking about her next relationship before this one is even over. I didn't confront her about it yet. I was still gathering information, still building my case. But internally, my decision was already made. Day 4, I met with the lawyer Alex recommended, a woman named Rachel who specialized in divorce cases. I walked her through everything. She took notes, asked questions about assets and timelines, and told me that if we moved forward, I'd want to act fast, before Isabella figured out what was happening and started hiding things or making accusations. I left her office with a folder full of paperwork and a retainer agreement. And on my drive home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt like I was back in control of my own life. When I walked through the door that night, Isabella was waiting for me, arms crossed. I knew from her expression that she'd figured out something had changed. She just didn't know what yet. Day 5 started with me making phone calls from my office at work. The kind of calls you make when you're systematically removing someone from your life. First, I called our phone carrier and moved Isabella's line to a separate account under her name. She could keep the number, but she'd have to pay for it herself starting next month. Then, I called our car insurance company and removed her from my policy. She was listed as a driver on my car, but it was titled in my name only, so legally, I could do this. I updated all my beneficiary information on my life insurance and retirement accounts, changing everything from Isabella to my brother, Ben. And I sent an email to HR at work doing the same thing with my health insurance and 401k. The whole process took about 3 hours. By the time I was done, I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying something impossibly heavy, and I'd finally put it down. I left work early and drove straight to Rachel's office, where I signed the divorce petition and wrote a check for her retainer. She told me the papers would be ready to serve by tomorrow and asked if I wanted to be there when it happened. I told her no. Just have the process server go to the house in the morning when I was at work. That evening, I came home. Isabella was in the kitchen, making herself a smoothie. She asked me if I'd thought about her evaluation and what changes I was planning to make. I looked at her, standing there in her expensive workout clothes, with her fresh manicure, holding a $400 blender. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. I told her I'd thought about it a lot, and I'd have an answer for her tomorrow. She smiled, like she'd already won, and went back to her smoothie. Day 6 is when everything fell apart for her. I went to work like normal. Around 10 in the morning, I got a text from my neighbor, Greg, the retired guy 2 doors down who I'd helped with his fence last summer. It was a photo. Isabella screaming at a process server on our front porch. Apparently, she didn't take the divorce papers well. My phone started blowing up with calls and texts from her, but I ignored all of them. I was in back-to-back meetings all day, and frankly, I genuinely didn't have time for her drama. Around 3 in the afternoon, Ben called and told me I needed to come home. That Isabella's mother, Sarah, had showed up at the house, and they were both losing their minds. I told him I'd be there in 30 minutes, and I left work early for the second day in a row. When I pulled into my driveway, there was a car I didn't recognize parked on the street. I could hear yelling from inside the house before I even opened the door. Isabella and her mother, Sarah, were both in the living room. Isabella was crying, and Sarah was pacing back and forth, talking on her phone. When I walked in, they both turned to look at me like I was the villain in their story. Sarah hung up and immediately started in on me. How I was ruining her daughter's life, abandoning my responsibilities, how no real man would treat his wife this way. I let her finish. Then I very calmly told her that her daughter hadn't worked in 4 months, had spent over $9,000 of my money on personal luxuries, publicly humiliated me on social media, and gave me a literal performance review like I was her employee. Sarah looked at Isabella for confirmation, and Isabella just stood there crying, not denying any of it. I told them both that I was done with this conversation, and that they needed to leave. Sarah said Isabella lived here and didn't have to go anywhere. So I pulled up my phone and showed them the 30-day notice to vacate that Rachel had drafted. Isabella had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. After that, I could pursue formal eviction if necessary. Sarah's face went red. She started yelling again, calling me every name she could think of. Isabella just crumpled onto the couch, sobbing. I went upstairs to my office and locked the door. I could hear them downstairs for another hour before they finally left. Around 8 that night, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Isabella standing there with 2 of her friends. I opened the door, and before I could say anything, she pushed past me into the house. Her friends followed, and suddenly I had 3 women in my living room, staging what I guess was supposed to be an intervention. Isabella was calmer now. She wasn't crying. She told me she'd overreacted this morning, that she'd been shocked and hurt, but she was ready to talk rationally now. She said she knew she made mistakes, but so had I. That marriage was about compromise, that we could work through this if I just canceled the divorce and gave her another chance. Her friends nodded along, like this was a reasonable request, like the last 4 months hadn't even happened. I stood there, listening to her, and realized she still didn't get it. She still thought this was negotiable, that she could manipulate her way back into the life she'd had. When she finally stopped talking, I looked at her and said the only thing that needed to be said. I told her, "You had 7 days, Isabella. And you wasted all of them." Her face changed. The fake calm disappeared, and she started yelling again about how I never loved her, how I used her, how she gave up everything for me. I didn't argue. There was no point. I just told her and her friends to leave, and that if they didn't, I would call the police. They left, but not before Isabella told me I was going to regret this, that she'd take me for everything I have, that I'd end up alone and miserable. I closed the door behind them and changed all the locks that night. I'd ordered new hardware online 2 days ago, and it had arrived that morning. Day 7 was quiet. Isabella didn't come by, didn't call, didn't text. I went to work, came home, and spent the evening packing up her belongings into boxes that I'd have delivered wherever she ended up. I found clothes with tags still on them, shoes she'd worn once, beauty products that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Every box I packed felt like evidence of how blind I'd been. How I'd let someone take advantage of me because I wanted to believe I'd made the right choice. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Because I knew it was finally over. I knew I was getting my life back. And I knew Isabella was about to learn a very expensive lesson about what happens when you mistake someone's patience for weakness. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. I'm sitting in my living room now, coffee in hand, thinking about how different my life looks. Isabella tried to fight for alimony, but her lawyer couldn't make a case when she'd only been unemployed for 4 months of our 8-month marriage, and had no dependents. Last I heard from Alex, she's working retail at a mall in Dallas, living with 2 roommates in a small apartment, and dealing with credit card debt from trying to maintain her lifestyle after I cut her off. I don't take any pleasure in her struggles, but I also don't feel guilty. She made her choices, and these are the consequences. As for me, I got that $2.8 million contract approved 3 weeks after the divorce was filed. It came with a promotion and a significant raise. I've been seeing someone new for about 2 months now, a veterinarian named Kate. She owns her own practice, and on our first date, she insisted on splitting the bill. She's 30, financially independent. And when I told her about Isabella, she said something that really stuck with me. She said that anyone who makes you prove your worth doesn't understand what partnership means. I still think about that performance review sometimes. How insulting, how dehumanizing it was to have my value as a husband reduced to scores and metrics. But I also think about how it was the wake-up call I desperately needed. Without that moment of clarity, I might have stayed in that marriage for years, slowly losing myself while Isabella drained my bank account and my self-respect. She wanted to evaluate my worth. And in doing so, she revealed her own. Or rather, the complete absence of it. What do you think? Did I handle this the right way, or was there another path?